Today is called the power of thoughts. What have you bought into today? So think about that for a second. What does it mean to buy into something?
Great morning, world! Welcome to the Rise Up with Dragon podcast with your host, Dragon!
Great morning, world. It's your boy, Dragon. And I'm excited to be here. Excited for another Rise Up with Dragon, where we're all going to have the opportunity to unpack an idea. And the word idea is going to be closely connected to today's Rise Up and topic. But what we want to do in this show, and what I hope my podcast does for people, so your feedback is always very important, because this started off as a goof and a grounds for me to practice my craft, but now it's turned into something that people are following. We're almost at 50,000 downloads a month right now. So your feedback would be greatly appreciated. Primarily, I'd like to know if you guys get this stuff, if it's serving you. The idea of taking concepts and unpacking them, better understanding things, maybe even uncovering that we're under a little bit more control than we think of our days and our thoughts, and thoughts is the topic today. So I was just thinking, so today is called the power of thoughts, and that's the Rise Up today. And I was thinking today about a question I could ask people in reference to this. Because in my research, in my studies, because obviously, just as a quick reference, I'm working on my book, and all my work is about this concept of making sense of things, gaining clarity, and gaining the ability to better understand things, right? And then also this idea of if you become better equipped at responding to the things that happen in life, which are out of our control, thus that puts you more in control, and it gives you the ability to experience and explore the world better. So I don't think there's anything more powerful that a human being can do, anything, than learn how to respond differently to things. So that's all of my work, and that's called the Interface Response System, and you guys are going to love it. I'm going to have the opportunity in September to share the stage with at this amazing event called The Final Percent. Sharon Lecter's going to be there from Rich Dad Poor Dad, Tim Story. He's just an amazing guy. So I'm going to have the opportunity to do a 30-minute, kind of like a little bit of an extended TED Talk on the Interface Response System. So I'm excited, because that's forcing me to make it even more simplified. But here's the question that I want to ask you today. This is the question I asked myself today, and that is this: what have you bought into today? So think about that for a second. What does it mean to buy into something? To me, it means that a thought comes into my mind, and I have the opportunity to either look at it as a thought, experience that the thought or the happening is triggering a feeling, and then I have the ability to say, I like this feeling or I don't like this feeling. It serves me or it doesn't. But then I have the ability or capability to decide whether or not it is or isn't, right? I can give it a yes, no, or maybe. And that's what it means to buy into something. And as soon as you buy into something, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, whether it's in support or out of support, once you buy into something, that's what you will take a stand for that day. So the question is what did you buy into? Have you bought into anything today? And the next thing I want you to just become consciously aware of is what it is that you bought into. Was it your idea or was it somebody else's idea? And what I mean by that, because we're going to talk about the power of thoughts as I do this Rise Up. And whatever you're looking at right now as your thoughts, you say, I have dark thoughts, I have happy thoughts, I'm not in control of my thoughts, whatever that means to you. The question is are they your thoughts or are they somebody else's thoughts? And I always talk about the just unbelievable breakthrough when you start to become aware that most of what it is that we're doing and the shots that we're calling during the day are not really being decided by ourselves. And what I mean by that is our mother, father, teacher, preacher, our programmers have for the most part taught us, and experience and the highlight reel, anything that we've consumed from yesterday till today has a lot to say with our thoughts. So are they your thoughts? If you bought into something today, was it your decision or somebody else's? So let's get into the power of thoughts. Very, very cool. So I want to talk about this idea of recognizing the power of thoughts, but also the idea of how to reclaim control of them. I think that's what we're all looking for. I've been talking a lot about this lately. If you're on a physical, mental, or financial journey, or all of them, meaning if your goal that you've set, and remember the 15 days of discipline is a great tool. So our website's live, riseupwithdragon.com. If you go there, a pop-up comes up and it gives you the ability to sign up for the free course. And you'll also get in our newsletter, which will give you some cool stuff coming up. But the idea is we want to just recognize that anything that we're working towards, we have a tendency of saying, yeah, I want to get in better shape. I want to be happier. I want to be more unfuckwithable, and I want to make more money. I want to have more financial freedom. But if you think about it, they're all connected to having a better shot at being under control. If you're overweight, what sucks about that most is that it makes you feel out of control. If your thoughts are, running you today rather than you running your thoughts, the feeling is out of control. If you have bills coming that you can't pay, it's out of control. So the idea of gaining control or reclaiming control of your thoughts is pretty powerful. Just as a quick side note, in the news, pretty crazy to think about this. They've just discovered a new skull in China. They found it like at the bottom of a bridge or something like that. And they're calling this, so they discovered a skull of somebody from prehistoric times or something like that. I just found out about this. And they're calling this new form of human, they're actually calling it Dragon Man. And there's really no sense about why they're using the word dragon. I was hoping that it would be something cooler, but what's crazy about this, you should all Google Dragon Man and just look at it up, because I love it, because what it does, it potentially completely just dismantles a lot of what we think from evolution. There's a great book out there called Sapiens that I read, and that talks all about like understanding why we are the way we are because of where we've come from. But this Dragon Man find screws a lot of that stuff up. And what I love about that is it just reminds us, back to my question of the day, of what we've bought into. A lot of us have bought into evolution. And we love to justify the way we are, fight or flight or freeze and all that stuff based on where we come from. But here we are, a new finding that's been hidden by the person that found it for quite some time that could totally shake things up. It's a bigger skull, it has housed a bigger brain and all that stuff, and it could completely screw up the timeline of everything. So I love that because it just reminds me not to buy into anything. So the question, when somebody says, Dragon, what have you bought into today? My answer to that is nothing. Nothing. I'm fascinated and I'm interested with things today, just like this Rise Up, but I haven't bought into anything today because I find that everything that I've ever bought into in life and thoughts are connected to that has evolved into something else. So hopefully that you can grab that and enjoy that for the day. So let's talk about the power of your thoughts. So the great Stoics, as you guys know, I read a lot of Stoicism and I practice Stoicism and Buddhism and things like that. And that all pertains to the interface response system. But the great Stoics spoke a lot about the catastrophic powers that our thoughts pose on us. Think about that. The catastrophic powers that our thoughts. That's why I ask questions like, are you in control of your life today, or is your life in control of you? That's the catastrophic powers that our thoughts pose on us. So both for us and against us. So thoughts are not always bad things. You can, Wayne Dyer says if you change the way you look at things, things you look at change. We can actually use this stuff, and that's what I mean by reclaiming control for us, but both for us and against us and our dream life. The idea of going after this dream life, our thoughts play a big role in this, for us and against us. So it's interesting to see that much of today's current best practices in therapy, so now, Chicken is very much involved in mental health. So I get to learn a lot about that cognitive behavioral therapy and all that fun stuff. But it's really cool to see that much of today's current best practices in therapy use several of these Stoic principles that came from a time where therapy didn't exist. This is really, really cool. When you look at therapy in general, whatever that means to you, its roots come from a time and some principles that existed before therapy was a thing, right? So therapy that's a man-created thing. I love that. So, in fact, the earliest signs of therapy were thought to originate from the times of the Stoics, where they would practice exercises of refraining and gaining a different perspective on their initial reactions. This is what they would practice, on their initial reactions to events and happenings, to help distance themselves. Think about this. They used to practice things. They used to practice thoughts and actions. And what it was about was distancing themselves enough from an event to unveil the opportunity to allow the more open and rational parts of their brains to call the shots and respond. That's very much the practice of Stoicism, is to practice things that distance you from your knee-jerk reaction enough so that you have time, and that's why I always talk about the power of the pause, so that you have time to make to access the more rational, logical part of your brain. A big part of the interface response system is this idea of pausing and taking what I call a holographic, W-H-O-L-E, holographic look at things, meaning looking at it from all sides, which requires yourself from distancing from it and not allowing your programmed knee-jerk response. So they used to do this. They used to practice these things, a lot of these things that I talk about. That's what it was about. So that's a fun thing for you to look at today, is whenever you perceive something and something happens, a happening happens, just make an attempt, and the pause is a great kind of a way that we can look at it. Make an attempt to distance yourself from it long enough and far enough away from it so that you can access a more logical, rational thing. So anyway, that's one of the things I dig about Stoics. So this self-therapy, right? So we can call that self-therapy. This is something they practice for themselves. This self-therapy then translated into the Stoics paying forward these highly controversial coping tools. Those were actually highly controversial to actually do something different than everybody else, which is what controversy is. Distance yourself and pause. Imagine back then if everybody just reacted automatically with ineffective tools, and then all of a sudden somebody pauses. So highly controversial, these coping tools. So basically now all of a sudden what they would do is they would pay forward those coping tools to others in letters of consolation. This is where therapy was born. In letters of consolation when they saw friends struggling with tragedy and loss. Now, you know a lot about this, because when you experience loss and somebody, there's this whole prayer warriors thing. I always find it interesting that when somebody experiences tragedy and loss, that's the most viral of posts. People, misery loves company. But if you think about it, that comes from these roots. If somebody says everything's going to be okay, don't worry, be happy. The bright side of things are, and I very often talk about that because I think that you can change the way you look at things, therefore they can change. But that was the beginning of therapy. So therapists today often quote Epictetus by sharing his famous quote. And this is what Epictetus said a long time ago. So there were the Greeks and the Romans, Marcus Aurelius and all that stuff. He says, it's not the things that upset us, but our judgment of the things. So that's a long, long time ago. And therapists today will say that, and that's a form of therapy, because it gives us the ability. So remember the power of the thoughts, and we're looking to reclaim them. What that's saying is that it's not the thing that you think is happening right now that's upsetting you. It's your judgment of it and your perception of it. So what that unveils is that whatever you think about something, that's the work that needs to be done, not the thing. Because I think a lot of times we hope and pray, because we fall victim to things, we hope and pray that we can get rid of the thing rather than look at the real tool, and that is how we look at the thing. So, and that's where this quote, change the way you look at things, things you look at change, But the struggle is how do I change the way I look at things? Because I need to reclaim power of my thoughts. So Marcus Aurelius referred to this practice, one of the most powerful men in the human, history and race. Marcus Aurelius referred to this practice as the separation of our value judgment from events. Think about what that means. If I separate my value judgment on something, what I'm saying is I'm going to step back from giving that thing value. So that's what he used to say long time ago, before any therapy existed. He says the practice as the separation of our value judgment from our thing. So that's a fun thing to do, is when something happens and you experience a knee-jerk reaction, what you do is you just try to step back in the power of the pause and separate from giving it value first. So one of the things that I teach in my talks and in my book is the power of, rather than using words in the pause, just use a sound. And one of my favorite sounds, when you say something, anybody on Clubhouse listening to this live or any of the followers in the podcast, I always react by saying, huh. And I love that sound because that sound means that I haven't bought into it yet. I hear what you're saying, so it's empathetic, but I'm going to think about it for a second. And what it does to the other person is it could frustrate them because they're like, hey, listen, whatever I say is. But anyway, interesting. So they also spoke of looking at these altercations between you and your choice of thoughts. Your choice of thoughts. So that means that we get to choose, right? We distance ourselves from the value. We get to choose our thoughts. They used to look at this as a wrestling match back then. And what that means is you keep trying different moves until you find the one that works best for you. So that's the practice. If you distance yourself from buying into things and you distance yourself from giving things value, which is what creates thoughts, and thoughts turn into moods and temperaments and personalities, if you go down that rabbit hole. But if you distance yourself and you try different things, that's why I like to look at things holographically, is I say, well, let me look at it from different perspectives and then find the one that I like and that works best for me. So they require practice. This is a practice. And as you guys know, I think everything that is actually happening is just a game and a simulation and a fantasy. So have fun with it. So this concept gives rise to the invalidity of thoughts in general. So that's one of the things I want to offer you today as we look to reclaim control of our thoughts. I want you to just look at them. Remember, you get to decide this stuff. I always say after I drop some of my dragon stuff on you, I recommend that you completely let it go and don't buy into it and choose whatever it is that you want to say. And remember that you have the ability to say yes or no, is or isn't, good or bad, whatever it is. But just recognize that you're in control of that decision. So when I say that I'm giving you permission to choose the way you want to look at things, that means you get a choice, but you should also connect whether or not that is the fantasy that you choose and serves you that day. So this concept gives rise to the invalidity of thoughts in general, meaning whether you buy into a positive or a negative thought, doesn't matter. A positive and a negative thought are always living in duality. They're always happening at the same time. So when you buy into one side of something, you've just picked the one that you've decided to buy into. And just as a side note, whatever it is that you've bought into today even if it's something that is giving you an unsettling feeling, you did it for a reason and it served you. So another fun question to ask yourself when you're having a rough time or a good time is to ask yourself, why did I choose this fantasy? And how does it serve me? Now, when you're having a bad time and you're a victim of something, it's very hard to say, I decided to do this, because you're a victim. It's not your fault. You always look to place blame. But of course you did. I'm telling you right now, it's a choice. Now you can practice becoming conscious of that, that ability for you to make a choice, but you made the choice. Our moods are very connected to our choice. So meaning whether or not you buy into something positive or negative thought about something, it's really just a choice followed with a commitment to it. So the buy-in, remember, you can make a choice and you could try different things like the wrestling match, but the buy-in is when you commit to it and you make a decision, this is. That's where we lock into thoughts. So if you're somebody that says, I can't control my thoughts, my mind is racing, I just want you to recognize, try to step away from that for a second, and before you give it value, and just recognize that you've committed to that thought. All you have to do is pick a different thought and commit to that. And somebody might call you foolish or a liar, but as long as it's working for you, that's fine. So not necessarily a valid one, right? The thought that you commit to. More of a decision and a preference of the fantasy and reality that serves you best at that time. So think about the word preference, right? I love to ask myself when I'm confronted in the interface response system. I teach people a lot of questions to ask. And whenever I'm choosing what side of something that I want to, I try not to buy into anything, but one side that I want to go with and follow, I always want to ask myself what my preference is. And when I ask myself, what's your preference, Dragon? It forces me to say, well, let's check on that. Where am I going? And what is it that I desire? And how does this serve it? Oh no, my preference is to keep going where I was going. So sorry. I'm experiencing something really interesting right now where there's a lot of dysfunction in my family, and my family listens to this podcast. So they'll probably challenge me on this, but I like a good challenge. We have this thing in our minds, and we've been programmed to believe that when it comes to family, even if something is not preferable, right, we're supposed to drop everything from where we were going and buy into that, right? And so there's guilt and all these things, these imaginary feelings that are built into that. So what's interesting about that is it's bullshit, right? What I have found is that I never have to stop going where I want to go because of something or someone else. I can choose to handle those things, but if I buy into them, then I stop going where I want to go. So that's an interesting thing. So that's right. If you're in a pissy mood, that's a decision and a choice that you made for your own benefit. That's a tough pill to swallow, but it's true. So if you're pissed off right now, for whatever reason, you decided on that. So remember, we fear success as humans, and therefore we're always looking at excuses to check out, which require someone or something to blame. So here's another interesting thought about your thoughts. Sometimes your thoughts will be reflections of a choice that you made, but let's go even deeper. Let's peel the onion back a little further. Why would you make a decision, which is for the most part unconscious, but why would you make a decision to choose to think something that was disadvantageous? Well, here's why. And this is an evolution thing, which might be completely thrown upside down by the Dragon Man that they just found. But either way, we come from something, fight, flight, or freeze. So why would we choose something that was ineffective or disadvantageous? It's because we're unconsciously always looking to shy away from responsibility. Now, why would we do that? Because when we take responsibility and we play above the line and we go after something with reckless abandonment, you know what happens? We get it. Good or bad, we get it. And if we're afraid of failure and success, of course we're going to look to get out of that. So our program is constantly fishing with a net to find something, an excuse to check out, which is very, very easy when somebody's done something to you. and you've bought into that reality. Now you can blame them, but in effect, how does it serve you? It got you out of responsibility. So that's what I mean, that if you're in a pissy mood, right, that decision that you made was something that you did for your own benefit. And I know that that's hard to acknowledge, but I know it's true for me sometimes. So when I observe someone checking out, I love this. When somebody says, I'm out, I'm checking out. When I observe somebody checking out and blaming somebody else, I always look at them and say this. I always say, genius. That's genius. Which prompts them to say, huh? Like, what the hell are you talking about, genius? You know, I'm out. And I say, no. What I think is genius is your strategy of getting out of this responsibility right now. It's genius. And I like to say that even at the expense of them getting even more pissy, because it helps them realize, and it's my practice, that that's what they're using it for. Isn't that true? Isn't that true? Whatever it is that you're going after now, physical, mental, financial, and look at your pattern of stopping. It's not your fault, right? Somebody else's. So we very often look for these things to check out. I call those hall passes. You know, a hall pass is when somebody writes something down that excuses you from class, right? So their strategy is genius. So your level up today, folks, is to become aware that you have the power to choose the fantasy that works best for you and your desired outcome. So here's what I mean by that. What I'm saying is whether you choose a positive thought or a negative thought, or whether you catch yourself drifting in positive or negative, just become aware of how thoughts are created and just ask yourself, did I buy into something? Because sometimes it's bad to buy into the fact that everything's fine, because then you start thinking that everything is supposed to always be fine. And then as soon as something happens that's not fine, that'll be your hall pass. So that's what your level up today is, just to become aware that you have the power to choose the fantasy that works best. They're both fantasies, good day or bad day. The non-fantasy approach is just to recognize everything, to be neither here nor there, but you have the right to choose. So I personally like to choose a fantasy that works for me and whatever it is that I've decided to do, right? Whether somebody says it's bullshit or not, I like to choose a fantasy. So what I do to control that is I watch my consumption. I stay away from TV and news and anybody or anything that is preaching, right? That's why I always invite you to let go of anything I say, because I don't want to be that preacher. I just like to have people step into this arena, this dragon's lair, and think. So this is why I find it so silly when we claim to be right about something, you know, because my perception of it, because of the work that I've been doing is, oh, okay, yeah, I can see that. So in reality, we're just sharing. When we say that when we're right, say, no, I'm right. What we're doing is we're just sharing what fantasy we're going with at that time, right? So it's fun to be on the receiving end of that, and somebody says something, they make a statement with an exclamation point. You can either look at that in controversy and say, no, you're not right, you're wrong. Or you can say, yes, I agree, you're right. Or you could have some fun in the practice of the interface response system and say, cool, so that's what you're going with, nice. I'm going to think about it a little bit. I'm going to look at it from different angles. So not one that actually is, but just what you're going with. So how do you tap into this? How do you tap into this stuff? It starts with creating that space. I think that's the biggest takeaway, is learn how to create space. And that's tough because people don't like when they do something and then you create space. Oh, that's interesting. I hear a car alarm going off that's breaking through my walls. So this episode today is sponsored by car alarms. So how do you tap into this? It starts with creating that space, that pause and separation between you and your knee-jerk automatic stress response and the judgment of the event. Let me read that again because the car alarm stopped. It starts with creating that space, that pause and separation between you, your knee-jerk automatic response, right? Your stress response, and the judgment of the event. So this is about spacing yourself from your knee-jerk reaction, your program reaction, and this idea of giving it value, right? So thinking about your thinking, that's what I want to offer today. I want you to just recognize that this whole thing is going on and just think about your thinking. Have thoughts about your thoughts and just recognize that they're just reflections of what you bought into. So by doing this, you become aware that you have that choice. That's the space that you identify. I do have a choice. There's a game going on right now, and I know that I created the game. And it's a fantasy too. So whatever you think is right now, it's a fantasy. So you get to decide to change the fantasy. That's what it means to pick up a pen and write your own story. So the space and separation give you the ability to catch yourself. I talk about drifting and shifting. I did a podcast on that. Catch yourself in your programmed response and ask what your preferred fantastic new thought would be. That's how you claim control, is you realize that you are in control and you can actually claim your thoughts. Now, the reason why I keep saying it takes practice is because you're trained to think that you don't control your thoughts. And we need to take medications and things like that. And Chicken always battles me on this because she says, you don't know what it's like to need medication. And I said, well, I think I do. So search for the bright side of things. That's what happens when you give yourself space. It gives you the ability to do that, and ask how that served you. Ask whether it matters or not, right? Whatever's happening to you, does it matter or does it not? Ask whether it's under your control or not. These are Stoic practices. Whether it actually has anything to do with you or not. There are so many wonderful tools therapists use today, like I said before, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, to help. And now you know where they're getting this stuff from. But your first step today is to simply embrace that you have a choice. And with practice, you can actually start to control your thoughts. You can learn to control your thoughts. And when asked for my opinion these days, this is what I always love to say. People always ask me, well, what's your opinion? Very dangerous when you give somebody's opinion, especially if they are enamored by you and they trust you and they believe in you. Be careful that's why I always say, let go of anything that I say. When asked for my opinion these days, I try to first pause and think about my thinking and acknowledge the programming and the stress response system, all the stuff I've been talking about. And then I select my chosen perspective that supports my goals, because they're asking me my opinion. I select my perspective that supports my goals and practice saying, the way I choose to see it at this time is that. So think about how cool that is. If you respond when somebody says, what's your opinion? And you say, at this time, the way I choose to see it is this. What you're telling yourself is that you're not buying into it. And it's just the fantasy that you're using, right? It's the vehicle you're using right now. And it's also letting the other person know that it might not be right. It might not be true. So that's how I control impacting others with opinions. Because what I usually do is I say, forget about my opinion. What do you think? I like to make it more about them than me. But if they don't know how to do this work, then they're just going to tell me what somebody told them to think. So anyway, that's my Rise Up today on the power of thoughts. I hope that you gained some nuggets from it today. It's my intention and passion to better equip people to respond to the interesting happenings of life. I think that's the most valuable thing you can do. Remember, you can follow me on Instagram at Rise Up with Dragon and interact. If you go to riseupwithdragon.com, you can sign up for the free newsletter and the 15 Days of Discipline giveaway. That's going to be awesome. I'm very excited for that. And I'm off to South Africa. So don't know what we're going to do with the live shows. And I've got a bunch of podcasts that I'm going to be loading. But for those of you that like to listen live, I might just rock a clubhouse or something like that, because I'm not taking all my equipment to South Africa. I have no idea. It's like the jungle over there. It's 50% unemployment right now. You're not allowed to go into the streets and stuff. And I'm doing this hard 75 thing where I have to exercise twice a day. So I'm going to just like roll around in the backyard and like chase dogs or something like that. Anyway, love and appreciate you. We're going to open up the clubhouse room and see if anybody wants to talk about their thoughts. And that's it. If you learned something today, give it away. That's how it's going to stay. Love and appreciate you.